Hello and welcome to the Consister the Coelc YouTube channel. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Jake Zabel of St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church, located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia. Today we're going to be continuing my lecture series on what it means to be a Lutheran by going through Luther's Catechism, and on today's episode we're up to the 9th commandment, which is you shall not covet your neighbour's house. Luther said in the Large Catechism that God added these two commandments, that is the 9th and the 10th, so that people would also think that coveting a neighbour's spouse or property or desiring them in any way is sinful and forbidden. When looking over the commandments, don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, many assume that they have kept them, such as the rich young man who said to Jesus, "I have kept all these from my youth." But in reality, no one is righteous. No, not one. For the thoughts of the hearts of man is only evil continually. Not just our actions are sinful, but our very thoughts and intentions are wrapped up in sin. Therefore, God has given the commandments against coveting, so that we would realize that we have broken God's law, not only when we have committed sins, but when we are thinking about committing them. Jesus points this out in Matthew 5:28 when he says that even looking at a woman with lust is equal to coveting. Is guilty of adultery. It is not just sinful to take your neighbour's wife, but desiring your neighbour's wife is also sinful. Now, each of these commandments have three chief characteristics. The first is its origin in the natural law, the second is the overarching principle it seeks to protect, and the third is the outreaching nature of the command and all that it commands us to do. The origins of this command goes back to the creation week. On the third day, God created the plants, including fruits and vegetables. On the sixth day, God created the Garden of Eden for man to live in. In that garden, he created fruit trees that were desirable to the eye and good for food. Here, the Hebrew word uses the word chamad for desirable to the eye, the same word used in the 10 Commandments for covet. The word itself has no negative connotation, it simply means to desire. It is connected with the concept of beauty and with pleasure. God created these fruit trees for man to eat, and therefore it was fitting and right for man to desire those trees. In this creation of the trees for man, God created the concept of desire. By telling man that he could eat of these trees, God was showing what the good desire was. What was right for him to desire was the fruit of these trees. But God also desired man not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. By telling man this, God was showing him what wrongful desire was. It was not right for him to desire the fruit of that tree. In Genesis 3:6, after Satan tempted Eve, she looked at the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Here Eve saw that the food was a delight to her eye, and she was to desire to, and it was to be desired to make one wise. Here the Hebrew word uses the word tavah, the word meaning to crave, which is used in the Deuteronomy 5:21 version of the 10 Commandments. And chamad, which means to desire. Here Eve coveted the forbidden fruit, and this was the first sin of mankind. Even before Eve had taken the fruit off the tree, she had sinned by desiring something she was not meant to desire. The principle that this commandment seeks to protect is twofold. The first is desire. God created humans with the ability to desire, and he wills that we would desire the right things. As stated above, man was to desire the fruit of any tree in the garden other than the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Desire itself is not wrong. The Hebrew word chamad is used throughout the Holy Scriptures in both a negative sense, such as coveting, but also in a positive sense. For example, in Psalm 19:10, he states that the law of God is more desirable than gold. Here the word of God is something that man should desire. Therefore, the principle that this commandment seeks to protect first and foremost is our desire for right things. The second thing that this commandment seeks to protect is contentment. As I said, desire in itself is not wrong. Notice that the commandment is not you shall not desire, but it is you shall not desire your neighbour's house. The sin is desiring that which belongs to somebody else, not that which belongs to you. In Eden, God made all the trees for Adam and Eve to eat from, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was reserved for God alone. Desiring fruit was not sinful, but Eve sinned when she desired something that did not belong to her. Eve was not happy with what she had. Instead, she wanted something more. The other thing that these commandments seek to protect is contentment, that we should not desire more than we need. It is not wrong to desire that which belongs to you. It is not wrong to desire my own wife. It is not wrong for me to desire the block of chocolate that sits in my fridge, for that is my chocolate and I'm allowed to desire it. But it would be a wrongful desire for me to desire someone else's wife or to desire someone else's block of chocolate, for they do not belong to me. These two commandments are not just about directing our desires towards the right thing, those things which are ours, but ultimately about being content with what we have and not desiring what we do not have or need. This leads us to the outreaching nature of the commandment. This commandment forbids envy and jealousy. As Luther said, these commandments are aimed directly against envy and miserable covetousness. When you desire that which belongs to your neighbor, you are envious of what he has. You wish that was theirs is yours. In Genesis 4:4-5, God blessed Abel and not Cain, and Cain became angry with Abel. This anger stemmed from Cain's jealousy, that he was not blessed as Abel had been. He was envious of Abel and coveted his blessing. This envy grew into anger. This anger grew into hatred, and this hatred grew into murder. God warned Cain that sin was crouching at his door and that he must get control of it. James 1:15 says that desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is grown forth, brings forth death. This is not to say that desiring this wrong thing is not a sin, but that wrongful desires will always lead to more sin. Desire is not sinful, but when we desire the wrong things, this conceives the sin of envy. And if we, like Cain, do not get a control of this sin, then it will give birth to something worse. Such was the case with David and Bathsheba. Desire is not sinful, but thus it would not have been wrong if David had desired one of his many wives. Instead, that would have been fitting and right for him to do. But instead, David's desire was wrongfully directed towards his neighbor's wife. This wrongfully directed desire conceived in David's heart the sin of lust and envy. He lusted after the woman who was not his wife, but instead of ruling over his sin, he allowed it to grow in his heart until it birthed into the sin of adultery, which then led to David having Uriah killed, thus the sin of murder. Here we see the sinfulness of coveting our neighbor's possessions and how they can lead to greater sins. God gives us these two commandments so that we would realize that not just the deed is sinful, but the thought and the desires to sin are also sinful. That we may learn that the intentions of our hearts are sinful, and if left unchecked, they will lead to greater sins. These sinful thoughts is what we mean by the term original sin. In the second article of the Augsburg Confession, it taught that since the fall of Adam, all humans who are born in the natural way are conceived and born in sin. This means that from birth they are full of evil lusts and inclinations and cannot by nature possess true fear of God and true faith of God. Moreover, this same innate disease or original sin is truly sin and condemns to God's eternal wrath all who are not in turn born anew through baptism and the Holy Spirit. From conception, humans are sinful, not only in deed, but as God said in Genesis 6:5, the thoughts of the heart of man is only evil continually. It is not just murder and adultery that are sinful, but also our very thoughts and desires to take from our neighbor what is not ours. Thus God gives us these commands against coveting, to teach us that envy and jealousy are just as sinful as murder, theft, and adultery. Next, this commandment is also designed to forbid greed. As Luther said, everyone tries to accumulate as much as he or she can and lets others to look out for themselves. As we said above, covetousness gives birth to a wide range of sins. This happens in two ways, envy and in greed. Envy is directed specifically at my neighbor's possession. I want what he has. Greed is directed at myself. I want more for me. The two go hand in hand, but envy is focused more on taking from your neighbor, while greed is focused more on gaining for yourself. Cain's envy of Abel led to him to murder his brother, while David's greed for his own pleasure led him to sleep with Bathsheba. 1 Timothy 6:10 says that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Money is not sinful, but a love for money is covetous. Even if you are not specifically coveting another person's money, the desire to have more and more and more for yourself is still breaking the 9th commandment. Greed is covetousness, for the command not to covet is about wrong desires. Desiring more than you need and not being content with what you have is a wrong desire. Instead, we should desire to be content with what God has given us. For example, in the Lord's Prayer, we pray for our daily bread, that which we need for today's survival. We do not pray in the Lord's Prayer for more than we need. In Philippians 4:11-12, Paul teaches us to be content in every situation, whether rich or poor, hungry or well-fed. We should not desire more than God has blessed us with. We should be thankful to God for what we have and content with what He gives. To desire more than you have or need is to be covetous. In Exodus 20:17, the word chamad is used for both commandments. But in Deuteronomy 5:21, the 9th commandment uses chamad and the 10th commandment uses tavah. The significance here is that in the Deuteronomy 5 version, the 10th commandment of the 10 commandments, the 9th commandment is not to covet your neighbor's wife, while the 10th commandment is not to crave your neighbor's house, field, etc. The word chamad means to desire, to want something, but the word tavah means to crave something. Like chamad, this word is not inherently negative. The word tavah means to crave something. It is connected with the word for hunger. It is used in the Old Testament in numerous places to refer to someone being hungry. In the context of the 10th commandment, tavah has the craving of your neighbor's property. The difference between desiring your neighbor's property and desiring it can be seen in what Deuteronomy 5:21 is referring to. In Deuteronomy 5:21 version of the 10 Commandments, you are not to desire your neighbor's wife, while you are not to crave your neighbor's house, land, workers, or livestock. The difference is that with desire, it is something you want, while with craving, it is something you need. We crave what we need. When we are hungry, we crave food. When we thirst, we crave water. Craving is connected with our survival. Therefore, craving your neighbor's property is about insisting that you need their stuff for your survival. We need food and shelter and a livelihood, but when we insist that you need what your neighbor has, otherwise you can't survive, that is coveting. This is not being content with what you have. Instead, this is insisting on having more than you need. This is the sin of greed. Wanting more, demanding more, insisting that you definitely must have it, that you need more, rather than just being content with your daily bread that God has given you. God will provide for our daily needs, and when we are content with what He supplies, when we are not content with what he supplies, but insist that we need more, that is coveting. We should desire what we need. By this I mean we should desire our daily bread and be content with what we have and not demand more. Now, there are 2 commandments against coveting, and this leaves us wondering what the difference is. Luther does not make a distinction in the large catechism, but in the small catechism, Luther teaches that the 9th commandment is about trying to trick our neighbor out of their inheritance or their property, while the 10th commandment is about trying to entice away our neighbor's spouse, workers, or animals. A simple rule of thumb is that the 9th commandment deals with inanimate objects and the 10th commandment deals with animate objects. The 9th commandment is about obtaining things through trickery and schemes. As Luther said in the Large Catechism, these are here to forbid anyone, even with an apparently good pretense and excuse, to harm a neighbor by intending or scheming to take away anything that belongs to their neighbor. These last two commandments are a kind of catch-all commandment to try and include everything not specifically covered by the other 10 commandments, or the other 8 commandments. So in regards to the 9th commandment, it would cover things that are not technically stealing, so they're not theft, but they are still sinful because you seek to benefit yourself and to harm your neighbor. For example, cheating someone out of their inheritance. Luther speaks of people who engage in lawsuits to squabble over inheritance that they claim is theirs. In this situation, they give the illusion of righteousness and use the disguise of being lawful in order to take from their neighbor. Here, the sin that is being committed is not so much in the taking of the property, for that would be theft, but is the gaining of the property through legitimate legal means. The sin here is your intention. Have you done this out of greed and envy? Then that is sin. So the 9th commandment is to cover all those questionable situations where the act itself may not be sinful, but the intention behind it is definitely sinful. You may be able to make gains through a legal process, thus this is not stealing, but if you have done it out of jealousy or with a greedy intention, then you have committed the sin of coveting. The 9th commandment covers anything that may not be stealing per se, but is making of gains through trickery and schemes. Micah 2:1-2 speaks of those who plan wickedness and make preparations to do evil. Micah speaks of men who covet a field or a house and manage to take it, adding that they deprive a man of his house or his inheritance. Luther, in the Small Catechism, specifically mentioned those who trick their neighbor out of their inheritance. Brian Wolfmueller of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod used the example of getting someone to change their will. Imagine a scenario where there is a mother who has 2 sons, and over time one niggles away at his mother until she cuts his brother out of the will. In such a situation, the son hasn't stolen anything from his brother, but out of greed and covetousness, he has done harm to his brother by cheating him of his inheritance. This is the kind of scenario that the 9th commandment condemns. Now, speaking about inheritance, it is a good way to understand the difference between the 7th and the 9th commandment. If my brother had a car and I stole it, this would be theft and a violation of the 7th commandment. But if my father has a car, which he intends to pass on to my brother as an inheritance, but I do something to have the inheritance transferred to me instead, so that my father would give me the car instead of my brother, this is not theft. However, I've still taken the car from my brother. So this is a violation of the 9th commandment because I've used trickery to have something gifted to me instead. The 9th commandment covers all those situations where it isn't theft because I didn't just steal it, but where I've used trickery or underhanded tactics to take something and have it gifted to me that should rightfully belong to somebody else. As Luther points out, the 9th commandment is about condemning those who seek to use the legal process to benefit themselves at their neighbor's expense. They cloak themselves in the law so that they can give the illusion that they are being righteous. I didn't steal it, they say. I won it fairly in the court of law. Now we must clarify that going to court and winning a legal dispute is not sinful. As I've said above, the 9th commandment is specifically targeting your intent. If your brother cheats you out of your inheritance, then you'd be justified in taking him to court so that this injustice would be rectified. On the other hand, if you use the legal process to cheat your brother out of his inheritance so that you could have the lot, then that is sinful. So the question lies with the intent and the purpose behind the matter. Am I doing this to fix an inheritance so that my neighbor and I may have equal share? Or I am doing this to cheat someone out of their share and take from them what is theirs and make it mine? We are not to desire our neighbor's possessions, to take them from him, nor should we do anything that would see him lose what belongs to him. Luther uses the example of a person who sees his neighbor is desperate for money and takes advantage of the situation to buy the property for half price or less. Again, this is not technically stealing, but in your dealings you have desired to take more than from your neighbor than their fair share. You have sought to benefit yourself at their loss. Luther says in the Small Catechism that we should instead seek to help our neighbour and to service them and to assist them in keeping what they have. As Luther explained in the Large Catechism, this is the most common meaning of this commandment. First, we are commanded not to desire to harm our neighbour, nor to assist in doing harm, nor to give occasion for it. Instead, we are gladly to let them have what is theirs and to promote and protect whatever may be profitable and serviceable to them. We should not desire our neighbour's property, nor seek to do anything that may see their property become ours. Instead, we must be happy for our neighbour and let them enjoy their own property. Do not be jealous of what they have and envious of what you lack. Instead, be glad for your neighbour that God has blessed them in this or that way. And do nothing that would seek to have their property given to you. Instead, do whatever you can to help them to protect and promote their own property. See to it that your neighbour is able to retain and enjoy what belongs to them. Be content with what God has given you, not being greedy for more than you need, nor envious of what others have. Rejoice in your blessings and thank God for what you have. And that ends my lecture on the 9th commandment. Join me again next time when we wrap up the 10 commandments by discussing the 10th commandment.